This choir teacher thought she was meeting up with her underage student to have sex. Instead, she arrived to find the police waiting. It's yet another disturbing case of a teacher sexually assaulting one of their students. We're breaking it all down with child protection and national security consultant and former federal prosecutor Francie Hakes. I'm Gillespie, and this is Law&Crime News. Today's story takes us to Southern California, specifically Santa Ana High School. That's where 37-year-old Yessenia Navarro Garcia has been a teacher for 5 years. And for the past 6 months, she's been the director of the vocal music program there. Also, for the past 6 months, she's apparently been involved in an illegal relationship with one of her students. We're not entirely sure what led up to these illegal interactions, the frequency at which they happened, or even how police were tipped off to this so-called relationship. What we do know is that the victim texted Navarro Garcia on Friday, November 15th, asking to meet somewhere in Santa Ana. Navarro Garcia agreed, but she arrived to find police rather than the student. According to a release from the Santa Ana Police Department, quote, "Upon arrival, she was taken into custody by officers. Garcia admitted to all the sexual acts that the victim reported." Again, we're not sure what all these sexual acts were, but we do know that there is digital evidence against Navarro Garcia, at the very least in the text messages sent the day she was arrested. She now faces several sexual assault charges and has been booked into the Santa Ana jail. Her bail was set at $100,000. Investigators also say that beyond this student, who's a senior at the high school, Navarro Garcia may have had sexual relations with other underage victims. This is a shocking story, to say the least, and to try to understand, we're turning to child protection and national security consultant and former federal prosecutor Francie Hakes. Francie, thank you for coming on with us today.
Thanks for having me, Sierra.
So from the jump, this story, right away to me, I'm thinking it's an abuse of power. We have a teacher here. Obviously, that's somebody that students usually look up to and should be able to trust. And she's allegedly having sex with one of her students. What do you make of that?
Well, Sierra, it's really interesting. And I've been teaching and training schools and other professionals about this for a long time. Unfortunately, for those who do have a sexual interest in children, professions like teaching and coaching, volunteering, the scouting, these are all target rich environments for those with a sexual interest in children. They find a lot of children that they can prey upon, and they usually know right away which kids they may be able to prey upon the most and who are the most vulnerable, who maybe are having a tough time at home or even a tough time at school, because the teacher's in a unique position, right? They know the loner kids, they know the kids who don't seem to have any self-confidence, they know the kids whose parents aren't necessarily as involved in their lives as some of the other children are. So the teacher is able to pick out the prey and assume the position of what I call a power position predator. And that is definitely a classic teaching position that allowed her to get close to him, get into his life, and exploit him.
One of the articles I read about this described it as a fling, which to me was really concerning because obviously this boy cannot give consent if he's under the age of 18. But going off what you were talking about, to me it seemed like this was a full-fledged relationship. It wasn't just sex, but she was obviously talking to him. And is that in some way grooming?
Well, that's definitely grooming, Sierra. And that is what these people in these power positions do. If you look at all sorts of cases, Larry Nasser, for example, was grooming not just his victims, but the parents of victims and the community. That's what these high status community offenders do, is they are able to convince not just their victims, but the community that they're good people, that they're caring people. I always tell people that if someone wants to spend more time with your child than you do, that's a red flag. And I guarantee you there were red flags. I guarantee you there are other teachers, probably other students, who either knew, suspected, or should have suspected, given the behaviors, exactly what was going on. And you're so right, Sierra. He is a child. And everyone describes it as having an affair or a fling. And it's disturbing. If it was an adult man and a young girl, would we say the same thing? I don't think so. But the roles are exactly the same. You have a vulnerable child who has no capacity to consent to what's going on, and the teacher in the power position taking advantage and committing crimes against this child.
When we talk about the specifics and you lay them out like that, it's just really hard to hear. I mean, I'm not even a parent, but I can imagine for the parents who are watching this thinking about their own kids, it's kind of hard to put yourself in those shoes. I'm kind of wondering if the parents may have had something to do with this young boy coming forward. We're not entirely certain what happened, but he did speak with police and investigators. Do you think that could have happened? The parents could have intervened and facilitated this conversation?
It may have, Sarah. What I've seen in a lot of these kind of cases, especially where there's this sort of extended period of abuse that's gone on here, it's a period of months, is there's often an inadvertent disclosure where someone discovers by accident what's going on and intervenes. Now, whether that's a friend of the child's, another teacher, or the parents, potentially discovering this relationship, as some people describe it, it's not a relationship, it is abuser and victim. But if someone discovered this by maybe looking at his phone, and that's certainly what I tell parents most often is you should know exactly what your child is doing on their digital devices. And if they know more than you do, which they often do, you need to educate yourself because your child should have no secrets from you so that you can protect your children from exactly this kind of scenario. No teacher should be direct texting or direct communicating teacher to student. I have told schools over and over again that no teacher should ever direct communicate with one student. The class, that's fine. As a group, that's fine. But it's not okay if you have these direct communications, which there no doubt was going on here.
Hey, a lot of you watching this might be business owners or even thinking of starting a side hustle. I have to introduce you to our new sponsor, Odoo. That's a free all-in-one business management software with tools to help you run your business. I'm a dog owner and wanted to build my dog Dash his own website using Odoo's website builder. It literally took minutes thanks to Odoo's easy tools like AI copywriting and drag and drop features. 5 minutes later and boom, we now have dashthedog.com. All I can say is thank you to Odoo for sponsoring our videos, and if you're interested, you can start building your site right now and even get a free domain for the first year with our link, odoo.com/lcnews8 to try Odoo for free. Texting is a huge part of this case, and a lot of the cases that we cover in this way, whether it's via Snapchat or even if they have each other's phone numbers, you're right, it is a red flag if the student and teacher are texting one-on-one. And here what happened is the student texted his teacher and said, hey, can you meet me at the school? And then she arrived and was arrested. Is that a big win for prosecutors to say, hey, we have this text. He said that he wanted to have sex with you and then suddenly you appeared. What's going on there?
It is a win for prosecutors, but Sarah, these cases are still very difficult to win ultimately because almost always they are a he said, she said, or she said, or he said sort of a case because there's rarely physical evidence. TV makes it look like there's always DNA, there's always fingerprints, and it's rarely the case because usually these cases are discovered long after the last sexual assault occurred. So there's just no evidence like that to be collected. So the digital evidence in this case is going to be really important. What was their text messaging going back and forth? Is it clear from the teacher's point of view what the teacher was saying? And is it clear that she was grooming him? What did she say when she was interviewed? All of these things are going to be important so that the jury can credit the testimony of the child.
And to your point, we still aren't exactly sure at this point what the evidence could be as far as the text messages. In some of the cases I've covered, these teachers take photos of themselves or videos of them having these sexual encounters. And if that's the case, obviously it's kind of a smoking gun, so to speak. The other smoking gun could be the fact that when she was arrested, she admitted to it, basically said, hand up, yep, okay, I was coming here for sex. However, could she later recant that confession?
Well, she can. I certainly hope they've recorded it. I hope it's either audio and or video recorded so that she can recant all she wants, but she has it. The law enforcement has it on tape. The thing about these kinds of cases that's important to remember, though, is that juries and even some judges have a real bias when the offender is a woman and the victim is a male. And that is because our society still doesn't understand the dynamics of child sexual abuse, where you do have male victims. They are victims. If you think about all the cases that have gone before with a female teacher and a male student, these women rarely get the same kind of punishment as a man would have gotten in the same position, especially, and this is terrible, Sierra, but I see it happen all the time, especially if the teacher is attractive. If the teacher is attractive, there's a real bias in the court system that the boy would feel lucky and that he was fortunate that his first sexual experiences were with such an attractive woman. It's not at all true that the boys are just as much victims as girls are and go through very similar after effects of being victimized by an adult, but our society doesn't seem to understand it even today.
Honestly, it's really heartbreaking, that stereotype. You are right, it's perpetuated. I mean, sometimes I look at the comments on these videos and see things to what you were talking about, because honestly, most of the time we talk about stories where it's a female teacher and then a male student. And it's really important to highlight that males can be victims in this case, which kind of leads me into my next question. This is a young boy. Obviously, I'm sure prosecutors are going to want to talk to him, potentially even put him on the stand, which is really intense to relive these traumatic moments in front of a jury, potentially even his parents or people he knows. How would prosecutors prepare him for that sort of questioning?
Well, I've had cases where I had male child victims, and they are different from girls. I don't mean to say they're not equally victimized. Of course they are, but they have a much harder time coming forward. They have a much harder time talking about the abuse. And as terrible as this is to say, they tend to have a more flat affect, as we call it, on the witness stand. And here's the dirty secret of child abuse and also rape cases. If a victim gets on the witness stand and does not act the way a jury thinks they should, and in cases of sexual abuse or rape, everyone expects the victim to cry when recounting what happened to them. And if they don't, the jury just ascribes that to someone who's not telling the truth, and they do not find the victim to be credible. When really, by the time these cases get to trial, it's been a year, it's been 2 years, or even longer. And that victim has told that story over and over and over with so much frequency that they just might not have the same emotion that they did in the beginning. They've also potentially gone through therapy by then. So they're feeling differently about their victimization than they did in the beginning. So these cases are very difficult. And I hope they have an experienced prosecutor who has handled cases with male child victims before, because it is a different dynamic.
If that's the case, let's say this boy does get on the stand and he doesn't cry. I mean, everyone reacts differently to their trauma, so no shade on him, but let's say that he doesn't cry. How would prosecutors then convince a jury if they don't have any DNA evidence and they have this boy who explains what happens, but maybe doesn't have quite the emotion the jury would hope for?
Well, corroboration is especially important. And in today's day and age, you might have noticed in the Lake and Riley trial this week here in my own home state of Georgia that there was a lot of digital evidence, phones. There's a lot of phones of the offender, and there's phone of Lake and Riley. And so you can see where the two people intersected on that fateful day where she was murdered. Well, the same might apply here. You talk to the child who, at 17 years old, will have a better sense of time and frequency that this occurred, and other than say, an 8-year old might. And so he may very well be able to tell the police, well, the last time this happened was X date, and this was going on at the same time. And they get the phone records of both the child and the teacher, and they're able to show that what the child says, where he was and where the teacher was, are the same place. So wherever their meeting place was is important. There's Ring doorbell cameras these days. There's all sorts of potential digital forensic evidence that puts the teacher and her victim in the same place at the time he says, and that bolsters his credibility. And that's the job of the prosecutor, to figure out what evidence bolsters this child's credibility so that the jury will believe the story that the child is telling. And that's through all kinds of evidence, maybe the confession by the defendant, but also digital forensics, putting them in the same spot.
I think you're right. I'm sure that prosecutors are going through all of that and getting the corroborating evidence. I'm wondering if they also are maybe working with investigators to see whether this was a pattern. In some of the cases I've covered before, these teachers have a history, not just one student that they were having this relationship with or sexual encounters with, but it could have happened over time. Do you think that's something that investigators would take a look at as well?
Yeah, I think they definitely will be asking if anyone knows of any other victims, asking victims publicly to come forward in the case, because that is a very key corroborating information in these kinds of cases. If you have more than one victim, they corroborate each other because their stories are almost always similar. That is the pattern of grooming, how the offender engaged in the conduct, what she said to the victims, how she engaged in the illicit sexual activity. All these things are corroborated by having more victims come forward. So no doubt they are looking. I mean, we'd be pretty lucky, wouldn't we, if she was caught the first time she ever victimized someone. I find it highly unlikely.
What's next for the defendant in this case? Obviously, prosecutors have a task ahead of them, but are definitely going to work hard to bring justice in the case. What do you think is ahead for this defendant?
Well, I hope jail. And that's what should happen. Just like male defendants, just like male sex offenders, she ought to be going to prison. And when she ever comes out, she should have to register as a sex offender. There's no way she should ever be allowed to be around children again. So I hope that she is pursued with the same vigor that prosecutors typically pursue a male offender in these kind of cases.
This is definitely a difficult one to talk about, but important to discuss. Francie, thank you so much for giving us some insight into this case.
Thanks, Sierra.
Again, the Santa Ana Police Department asked anyone with more information or any other victims in this case to come forward. Any new info could help the prosecution's case against Navarro Garcia. For Law and Crime, I'm Sierra Gillespie.